A knock echoed through the silent night. Isabelle Lane, 29 years old, young CEO of Orion Technologies, jolted awake, her heart pounding. The clock read 4 in the morning. Through the glass door, her neighbor, Marcus Cole, a single dad living with his young daughter, stood in the snow, his jacket soaked through. "Don't go to work today," he said, his voice urgent and desperate. "What are you talking about?" Marcus held out his phone. The screen showed Orion headquarters engulfed in flames. Isabelle froze. If she'd left at her usual time, she would have been there. Isabelle Lane was 29 years old, the CEO of Orion Technologies, known throughout Boston's business community for being cold, calculating, rational, and living in an upscale neighborhood in suburban Boston where success was measured by the size of your house and the brand of your car. She'd lost her mother to cancer when she was only 6 years old and had been raised by her father, a dedicated fire safety engineer who worked for the city. But he died saving workers from a warehouse fire when she was 17 years old, just before her high school graduation. Since that devastating day, she'd sworn to herself that she would never depend on anyone emotionally, never let herself be vulnerable, believing only in logic, careful planning, and the cold comfort of professional success. Her neighbor directly across the street was Marcus Cole, 35 years old, a single dad and former aerospace engineer who had quit his prestigious position at a major firm after his wife died suddenly in a factory accident 3 years ago. He was raising his 7-year-old daughter Emma, completely alone, surviving on inconsistent freelance repair work and various part-time jobs that allowed him to be home when Emma got off the school bus, when she needed help with homework, when she woke up crying from nightmares about her mother. Isabelle rarely spoke to Marcus beyond polite nods in passing, only occasionally seeing him playing with his daughter in their front yard on weekends, his eyes gentle and patient, but carrying something deeper, some hidden pain that she recognized but couldn't name. One cold evening in early December, when she arrived home exhausted after a 15-hour workday filled with budget meetings and merger negotiations, she saw Marcus kneeling on his front porch, carefully lighting white candles in the falling snow. "Memorial for my wife," he explained quietly when he noticed Isabelle watching from her car. "She died 3 years ago tonight, on a snowy night exactly like this one." Emma asked if we could light candles so her mama could find her way home from heaven. Isabelle only nodded, uncomfortable with such raw emotion, and hurried into her house. But that night she couldn't sleep, because the candlelight flickering through her bedroom window reminded her painfully of the vigil she'd held when her own father passed away, the memorial service where she'd stood alone because she'd pushed everyone else away. The next morning in the building elevator, Marcus spoke to her unexpectedly. "You work at Orion Technologies, right? The big glass building downtown?" "Yes, I'm the CEO, actually." His expression changed slightly, became more serious. "If you can possibly avoid it, don't go in early tomorrow morning. Take a sick day, work from home, anything." She smiled faintly, confused and slightly annoyed. "Did you just watch a disaster movie or something? Are you making a joke?" He looked at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "I hope I'm wrong. I really, genuinely hope I'm completely wrong. But please, just this once, don't go in early." Before she could respond, the elevator doors opened and he left with Emma, leaving Isabelle standing alone with a growing sense of unease she couldn't explain. She tried to dismiss his warning as paranoia or strange neighborly concern, but something in his voice had been too sincere, too desperate. At 4 in the morning, the knock came, loud, urgent, insistent. Isabelle jolted awake, her heart racing, her mind immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios: fire, robbery, emergency. She grabbed her phone and approached the door cautiously, looking through the security peephole. Marcus Cole stood in the falling snow and rain mix, his jacket soaking wet, his face pale with panic and fear. Emma bundled in a blanket in his arms behind him. Isabelle opened the door. "Marcus, what's wrong? Is Emma okay?" "Don't go to work today," he said immediately, his voice shaking. "Please, Isabelle, I'm begging you. Don't go to Orion today. Don't go anywhere near that building." "What are you talking about? It's 4 in the morning. Have you lost your mind?" Instead of answering, he held out his phone with a trembling hand. The screen displayed live news footage. Orion Technologies headquarters burning, massive flames consuming the building's upper floors, black smoke billowing into the pre-dawn sky, emergency vehicles everywhere, reporters shouting about explosions and casualties. Isabelle stared in complete shock, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. That's, that's my office, she whispered, her lips trembling. That's the executive floor. That's exactly where I would be right now. The news crawler at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking explosion at Orion Technologies. Multiple casualties confirmed. CEO Isabelle Lane status unknown." Real witness detail. The orange firelight from the phone screen reflected on Isabelle's face, her hand gripping the door frame so tightly her knuckles turned completely white, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "If you hadn't come here," she said, her voice barely audible, "if I'd left at my normal time like I do every single morning, I would have been at my desk when that happened. I would be dead right now." Marcus stepped closer, his own fear visible. "I couldn't let another person die because I stayed silent. Not again. I couldn't go through that again." "What do you mean, again?" But before he could answer, Emma stirred in his arms, rubbing her eyes sleepily, confused about why they were outside in the cold at such a strange hour. "Daddy, why did we come here so early? I'm tired." Marcus knelt beside his daughter, pulling her close. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, saving someone means not waiting until morning. Sometimes you have to act immediately, even when it's scary and you're not completely sure." Isabelle looked at this man who'd run through a snowstorm at 4 in the morning to warn a neighbor he barely knew, risking looking crazy or paranoid, potentially ruining their fragile neighborly relationship. For the first time in 12 years, since her father died saving strangers from a burning building, she felt what it meant to have someone truly deeply care whether she lived or died. "Come inside," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "Both of you, please come inside. I'll make coffee, hot chocolate for Emma, and you're going to tell me everything. How you knew, why you came, what this is really about." They sat in her minimalist living room with its expensive furniture and cold, sterile design, so drastically different from the warm, cluttered, lived-in space of Marcus's home she'd glimpsed through his windows during those rare moments when she'd allowed herself to look. "Last night around 11, I was doing some electrical repair work at the old technical district near Orion," Marcus began, his hands wrapped tightly around the coffee mug as if trying to draw warmth from it. "I was replacing some wiring in a storage facility that backs up to your company's property. I overheard two men in the alley talking." "Talking about what?" "About the arrangement for this morning. At first, I thought it was just some kind of business argument, maybe a dispute over a contract or something mundane. But then they started discussing timing, specific timing. They mentioned the building's electrical system, basement access, safety override codes." Isabel's blood ran cold. "They were planning the explosion. And then one of them said your name," Marcus continued, his voice heavy. "He said the CEO always arrives at exactly 6:30 in the morning. She'll be on the executive floor when it happens. Make sure the charges are set for 6:45. "Oh my God," Isabelle whispered. "Someone tried to murder me. This wasn't just an accident or a system failure. Someone deliberately tried to kill me." Marcus nodded gravely. "I wanted to call the police immediately, but I realized I had no real proof, just an overheard conversation in a dark alley. They would have asked for evidence, for recordings, for something concrete. By the time they investigated, it would have been too late. So I did the only thing I could. I made absolutely sure you wouldn't be in that building when it happened." Isabelle stared at him, her entire carefully constructed worldview of logic and planning and controlled outcomes suddenly revealed as meaningless, fragile, utterly inadequate. "You risked everything," she said softly. "Your safety, your reputation, your relationship with Emma, if something had gone wrong. You risked looking completely insane, all to save someone you barely know." "Why?" Marcus met her eyes with an intensity that took her breath away. "My wife died because someone saw warning signs and said nothing," he said quietly. "Someone knew there were safety problems at her factory. Someone saw the violations and chose silence over action. I won't ever make that mistake. I won't ever be silent when I can save a life. I couldn't save her, but I could save you. Save. The next morning, television news exploded with the story. Explosion at Orion Technologies. Cause determined to be a catastrophic electrical system failure in the basement level. Fortunately, CEO Isabelle Lane was not present during the incident. Isabelle sat frozen. Throughout the entire morning, she remained on her balcony, staring at the building in the distance where smoke still rose against the gray sky. Marcus brought her a mug of hot cocoa. I know you don't want anyone's pity, but at least drink something warm. Did you know this would happen? She asked, her voice trembling. How could you possibly know? Marcus told her everything he could remember. Those two men I overheard, they weren't speaking carelessly. They knew exactly what they were doing. They mentioned timing, electrical systems, safety overrides being disabled. It sounded planned. Isabelle looked at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and horror. You risked your life like this to save a stranger? He answered quietly, I don't want anyone else to die because of my silence. Not ever again. Emma ran over holding a small bracelet woven from red cord. Miss Isabelle, Daddy says this helps chase away bad things. Isabelle laughed softly, the first time she'd felt genuinely cared for in years. In the following days, she found herself spending more time at Marcus's house. He taught her how to bake bread, his hands guiding hers through the kneading process. She taught Emma how to draw and build small robots from recycled cans and bottles. One evening while cleaning up, Isabelle noticed an old photograph on the wall. Marcus and his wife standing in front of the Orion building. She was an engineer there, he said, following her gaze. The day of that explosion 3 years ago, I received a text message warning me, don't come to the factory today. But I didn't believe it. I thought it was a prank or a mistake. And I lost her forever because I didn't listen. Isabelle fell silent, tears falling on the photograph's glass frame. There was a previous explosion, she whispered. 3 years ago, smaller. The company called it an accident, paid settlements, buried the investigation. Marcus's voice was hollow with old pain. 7 people died, including my wife. They said it was human error, equipment malfunction, unpredictable circumstances. But you don't believe that. I know it wasn't, because I worked there. I was an aerospace engineer at Orion, designing their energy systems. 6 months before the explosion, I submitted a report about critical safety issues. I warned them about outdated electrical systems, insufficient fire suppression, overloaded circuits in basement levels. What did they do? They told me I was being paranoid, that upgrades were too expensive, that I should focus on my job and stop creating problems. So I quit. And 2 months later, my wife died in the building I'd warned them about. Isabelle understood now. That's why you couldn't ignore what you heard. Why you had to warn me. I failed to save her because I didn't fight hard enough. I won't fail again. Real witness detail at end of act. Isabelle removed the red cord bracelet from her wrist and tied it around the photograph frame, a thank you to the woman who wasn't there, but whose death had taught Marcus to save others. That night, Isabelle made a decision. She would investigate the explosion herself. Because if Marcus was right, if this wasn't just an accident, then someone had tried to kill her and potentially others, and she couldn't let that stand. Marcus found her at 2 in the morning, surrounded by laptop screens and documents she'd retrieved remotely from Orion's servers. You should rest, he said gently. I can't rest. Not until I know the truth. She turned one of the screens toward him. Look at this. The fire suppression system in the basement was disabled 3 days ago for routine maintenance. But there's no work order, no authorization, no record of who did it. Marcus leaned closer, his engineering background immediately recognizing the implications. Someone deliberately created the conditions for an explosion. And they timed it for when I'd be in the building. Isabelle's hands were shaking. Marcus, someone tried to murder me. Then we find out who, he said firmly, and we make sure they can't hurt anyone else. 1 week after the explosion, Isabelle returned to Orion's temporary offices. She was determined to investigate the incident thoroughly, despite pressure from the board to simply accept the official explanation and move forward. Marcus helped her recover data from partially destroyed hard drives. his engineering background proving invaluable as he carefully extracted files that others had declared unrecoverable. When they finally opened the restored files, Isabelle discovered something chilling. Multiple technical warnings about electrical system overloads had been deleted from the final safety reports. "Someone deliberately removed these warnings," she said, her voice cold with anger. Marcus quietly replied, "3 years ago, when I submitted similar reports about circuit risks, my supervisor told me, 'Don't make trouble.' I resigned immediately after." She turned to him in shock. "You actually worked at Orion? You never mentioned that." He nodded. "I understand that building structure better than almost anyone. I helped design the energy distribution system for the executive floors. I know where every circuit runs, every potential failure point." They worked through the night, piecing together evidence. Freeze moment number 1. Deep in the recovered data, Isabelle found a deleted internal email that made her blood run cold. "Upgrade costs for electrical system exceed budget projections by 40%. Recommend postponing until next fiscal quarter. Risk assessment. Low probability of critical failure within 12-month period." The signature, Elliot Mendez, Vice President of Operations at Orion Technologies. The email was dated 6 months before the explosion that killed Marcus's wife, and 3 weeks before the explosion that nearly killed Isabelle. "He knew," she whispered. "Mendez knew the systems were dangerous and chose to do nothing." Twice. Marcus stared at the screen, his hands clenching into fists. "That's the man who told me I was being paranoid, who dismissed my warnings, who assured everyone the building was safe." Isabelle made copies of everything and called an emergency board meeting. She stood before Orion's directors, executives, and legal team in a rented conference room, the damaged headquarters still unusable. "I cannot remain silent," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We've had 2 catastrophic explosions in 3 years. 7 people died in the first one. 3 more died in the most recent one, and I nearly became the 4th. This is not bad luck. This is criminal negligence." Elliot Mendez, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, stood up smoothly. "Isabelle, you're traumatized. You're seeing conspiracies where there are only tragic accidents. Our insurance investigators have already—" "Your insurance investigators haven't seen this," Isabelle interrupted, displaying the deleted emails on the large screen. "These are your words, Elliot. Your recommendations to delay safety upgrades. Your decisions that killed 10 people." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Mendez's face darkened. "Those emails are out of context. They're evidence," Isabelle said firmly. "Evidence I'm turning over to federal investigators. Evidence of corporate manslaughter." The board chairman, Richard Thorne, a man who'd been with Orion since its founding, spoke gravely. "Isabelle, if you pursue this course, you'll destroy this company. Our stock price, our reputation, our contracts, everything will collapse. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" "Are you prepared for the responsibility of more deaths?" she shot back. "Because if we cover this up again, if we prioritize profit over safety again, more people will die, and I won't have that on my conscience." Mendez stood up, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're going to believe some paranoid neighbor over corporate procedures, over professional engineers and safety inspectors?" "That paranoid neighbor is Marcus Cole," Isabelle said, her voice cutting. "Former senior aerospace engineer who worked here for 8 years, who submitted detailed safety reports that were ignored, whose wife died in an explosion he tried to prevent." She gestured to the back of the room where Marcus stood with Emma. "Marcus has the original copies of his safety reports from 3 years ago. Reports that mysteriously disappeared from Orion's files. Reports that prove he warned the company about these exact dangers." Marcus walked forward, placing a folder on the conference table. "These are my original engineering assessments, with my professional seal. I've also submitted them to the National Transportation Safety Board and OSHA. They're already investigating." The board members' faces went pale. That evening, Isabelle held a press conference and released all the evidence publicly. She acknowledged her role as CEO and accepted responsibility for not discovering the cover-up sooner, but she named Elliot Mendez specifically as the person who'd repeatedly ignored safety warnings to save money. The media exploded. News outlets worldwide picked up the story. Tech CEO exposes corporate cover-up that nearly killed her. Orion Technologies, 10 deaths that could have been prevented. Single dad's warning saves CEO, reveals deadly conspiracy. During the federal investigation, Marcus appeared before the safety board with his original building designs. The documents proved conclusively that his warnings had been specific, detailed, and professionally sound. They showed that implementing his recommended upgrades would have cost approximately $2 million 3 years ago. The company had saved that money, and 10 people had died. Isabelle was temporarily suspended from her CEO position pending investigation, though no wrongdoing was found on her part. Orion's stock collapsed. Mendez was arrested. The board faced multiple lawsuits. A reporter asked Isabelle at the federal building area, "Do you really trust the word of an ordinary worker over corporate executives?" Isabelle looked directly at Marcus, who stood beside her with Emma. "I trust people who knock on doors at 4 in the morning to save strangers," she said clearly. "I trust people who choose humanity over profit. I trust people who have nothing to gain and everything to lose by telling the truth. That's who I trust." The crowd of reporters fell silent. Then one began to clap, then another. Within moments, dozens of people, journalists, investigators, families of victims, were applauding. Not for Isabelle, for Marcus, for the single dad who'd lost his wife to corporate greed and refused to let it happen again. After the investigation concluded, Isabelle resigned from Orion Technologies. She couldn't remain at a company built on ignored warnings and buried truths. She and Marcus, along with Emma, moved to a small coastal town in Maine, far from Boston's corporate towers and bitter memories. They opened a small workshop together, Cole and Lane Technical Education Center. The center taught underprivileged children about engineering, renewable energy, and most importantly, the ethics of putting safety and human life above profit. Outside hung a wooden sign, "Building Safe Tomorrows." One afternoon, as they assembled solar panels with a group of enthusiastic teenagers, Marcus asked, "Do you miss your old life? The corner office, the power, the influence?" Isabelle smiled, her hands covered in grease from the machinery. "I only regret that I didn't trust good people sooner, that I thought logic and planning could replace human connection." Emma ran over, carrying a pot of white chrysanthemums. "Miss Isabelle, Daddy says Mom loved these flowers." Isabelle took the pot gently. "They're beautiful. My father loved them too." They planted the flowers beside the workshop's front window. Symbol of rebirth, the white chrysanthemums blooming in the coastal wind, representing forgiveness, new beginnings, and the memory of those lost transformed into something growing and alive. That evening in their shared home, a renovated cottage overlooking the ocean, they cooked their first real meal together as a family, not employer and employee, not survivor and rescuer. Just 3 people who'd found each other in tragedy and chosen to build something better. Marcus looked at Isabelle across the dinner table. "Thank you for staying." She reached across and took his hand. "You knocked on my door to save me. Now I'm here knocking back, choosing to stay, choosing this life, choosing you." Emma giggled. "Does this mean Miss Isabelle is staying forever?" Marcus and Isabelle looked at each other, both smiling. "Yes," Isabelle said softly, "forever sounds exactly right." The investigation had concluded with criminal charges against Mendez and 2 other executives. Families of the victims received significant settlements. Orion was restructured under new leadership committed to transparency and safety. But more importantly, Marcus and Isabelle's testimony had sparked industry-wide reforms. New laws required mandatory engineering safety audits. Whistleblower protections were strengthened. Corporate executives could now face criminal charges for ignoring documented safety warnings. Their story had changed an entire industry. But sitting in their small cottage, teaching children about engineering ethics, Isabelle realized the real change was personal. She'd spent her whole adult life building walls, trusting only logic, believing vulnerability was weakness. Now she understood that the strongest choice she'd ever made was opening her door at 4 in the morning and trusting a desperate neighbor's warning. 1 year later, the Cole and Lane Technical Education Center had grown into a nationally recognized program. They taught over 200 children, many from families who'd never imagined their kids could become engineers or scientists. During the anniversary celebration, the mayor spoke. Two people who lost everything to corporate greed have saved hundreds of children by teaching them that ethics matters more than profit. That's the simplest miracle of all. Isabel stood beside Marcus, their hands intertwined, watching Emma demonstrate a solar-powered robot to a group of fascinated younger children. That morning when you knocked on my door, Isabel said quietly, I thought you were crazy, or paranoid, or both. Marcus smiled. I thought I might be too, but I couldn't risk being wrong. You saved my life, and then you gave me a better one to live. And you, Marcus replied, took my loss and helped me turn it into something meaningful. You gave my wife's death a purpose. They stood together as snow began to fall. The first snow of winter, gentle and soft. Emma ran to them, her face glowing with excitement. Look, it's snowing just like the night Daddy saved you. Isabel knelt beside the girl. Your daddy is the bravest person I know. He taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you're terrified. And you taught me, Marcus added, that it's never too late to start over, to choose love over fear. Final scene. That evening, the three of them sat by the fireplace in their cottage. On the wall hung a wooden plaque carved with words that had become their family motto. Saved once, now saving others. The light from the fire reflected through the window, illuminating the red cord bracelet still tied around the photograph of Marcus's late wife. No longer a symbol of grief. Now a reminder of gratitude, for the loss that taught him to save, and for the woman whose memory had kept his conscience alive. Isabelle looked at Marcus and Emma, her chosen family. Sometimes, she said softly, the knocks that come at 4 a.m. don't wake you up. They bring you back to life. Emma smiled sleepily. What does that mean? Marcus pulled both of them close. It means we found each other exactly when we needed to, and we're never letting go. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in quiet white. Inside, 3 people who'd survived tragedy sat together in warmth and light. The knock at 4 a.m. had changed everything, and they would spend the rest of their lives making sure it had counted. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Strong Dad Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.